switch there. I wanted to welcome everyone to our community meeting called From Head Start to High School, Protecting Public Education, brought to you by the League of Women Voters of Glen Ellyn, as well as the League of Illinois. My name is Karen Daly. I'm the VP of Program for the Glen Ellyn League. And with us today, we have a great panel. I'm very excited to introduce them. Please note that this meeting is being recorded. While there is the ability to ask questions on the Zoom form under the chat function, it's likely we won't be able to get to them during the session because we have a lot of questions already to ask. If there's a way to get back to you, if you wanted to ask one, we'll do our best to try to get back to you. Before I begin, I'd like to read the League of Women Voters of Illinois position on education. The League of Women Voters believes that the government must provide an equitable, quality public education for all children from pre-K through grade 12. A quality public education is essential for a strong, viable, and sustainable democratic society and is a civil right. So let's introduce the panel. With us today, we have Ann Quarter, who's the educational specialist from the League of Women Voters of Illinois. We have Shauna Ejeh, the Senior Vice President for Illinois Action for Children. We have Lauri Morrison-Frichtl, the Executive Director of Illinois Headstart Association. Sarah O'Donnell, the Executive Director of the Glen Ellyn Children's Resource Center. Jessica Santee, the Superintendent of Schools for Glenbard District 87. So please refer to the League of Women Voters of Glen Ellyn's event announcement to see our panelists' bios, because in there you'll find that they are extremely well qualified for the discussion ahead. Someone just returned from Washington, someone's at another conference in Chicago. So these women are in the thick of educational issues. We're thrilled to include early childhood in this discussion. We have 3 leaders in that space on the panel, and we feel it's often overlooked in community discussions about education. As we know, the first years create a foundation for lifelong learning and development. Today, public education in America faces a myriad of interconnected issues. In this panel, we have educators, administrators, and nonprofits that support students from the earliest learners through high school and beyond. In our discussion, we hope to highlight the intersection of national policy debates with day-to-day realities in public schools. Some issues facing education today: budget shortfalls and funding cuts, including the dismantling of the U.S. Department of Education; basic needs and student well-being, such as reductions in SNAP, Medicaid, and other social safety net programs; safety concerns as we face an epidemic of gun violence; vouchers and school choice issues; immigration, deportation; our mission of teaching every child. Not in addition to curriculum disputes that sometimes pop up involving parents and residents. As you can see, we have more issues than we can possibly cover tonight in our hour plus. And while each of our panelists would love to answer each question, we'll direct questions to specific panel members, so not everybody's going to be answering every question that pops up. To help us navigate all of this, let me introduce our moderator, Erica Nelson, who is an educator and former president of the District 41 School Board. Welcome, Erica and panelists.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Karen. Glad to be here. And thank you to our panelists, and also to everybody who's made time tonight, because you've carved out time to be here. So we're really thrilled that you've joined us. So I'm going to get into it because, you know, our timing is 7 to 8:15, and we have a lot to talk about. But I want to start with what we're calling our speed round, and it's a warm-up question. And so I'd like to start with Sarah. We'll have you start with this, and about 30 seconds on this. I know you'll have more time for the other questions, but we thought we'd just do a quick 30-second. Overall, right? So generally, what do you see as the most significant threat, concern to public education today?
Sure. The threats facing public education today are complex, and they're very interconnected to one another. The most significant threats include chronic underfunding and inequitable resources, rapidly changing technology, teacher shortages, and workforce challenges, just to name a few. Independently and coupled together, these threats endanger the promise of equitable, high-quality education for every child and early intervention support for children who need us the most.
Right. Thank you, Sarah. Appreciate that. Shauna, go ahead and unmute your mic.
Wow. Well, Sarah, you absolutely have hit it on the head. I think for me, though, looking holistically, it's really around mindset. I think we are seeing a consistent devaluing of education, and that is sort of the message I feel that we're getting from the federal administration, everything from the dismantling of the Department of Education, but even, sort of shifting funds to focus on developing workers as opposed to developing critical thinkers. We've always had to battle in early childhood the mindset around folks in the early years really, they just need babysitters, right? That it's not about education. And so now I see it permeating all aspects of the educational pipeline and system, and it's alarming.
Thank you, Shauna. Jessica.
Thank you, Erica. Gosh, so many great things are being mentioned here that were on the top of my list to be mentioned. I think to add to the conversation, I was thinking, as I was thinking about this question from a global standpoint, not just necessarily from our district alone, but from our state and from a national lens, the conversation around the funding inequities and the conversations about how public education is funded varies by state in extreme manners. And so that's always been a piece that continues to be under question, as well as our resource gaps and the experiences of students in rural to suburban to urban areas and the challenges they face. I think to add a component to this, though, I think there is a major piece that we feel around the political polarization that continues to divide our societies. When I feel like our purpose, right, fundamental purpose in education is to bring our communities together, unite, understand, value one another. And so it's an ongoing battle.
Yeah, thank you, Jessica.
Mm-hmm.
Lauri.
Well, thank you. And thank you for including early childhood and Head Start tonight in the conversation. I appreciate that. I think, for Head Start's federally funded federal to local structure, I think that in this structure, Head Start has been serving those most in need across every community, those most at risk, most vulnerable. And we feel like that's being threatened to serve those most in need, and that we're being pushed to serve to move away from serving families that need us the most. And so I think that's the whole diversity, equity, and inclusion, and not being able to serve those families most in need in our communities. So for us, I think that's our greatest threat.
Yeah, thank you, Lauri. And Anne.
Yeah, I get to hit cleanup.
Right, you do.
Yeah. So there are concerted attacks on public education. It's been going on for a while, and I think with Project 2025, it's gotten much, much worse. We've got vouchers, attacks on the curriculum, and publication of inaccurate curriculum. DEI issues are muddying the waters in every classroom now, making it very difficult for teachers to focus on what they're trying to accomplish. And then most of all, funding, of course. The majority of Illinois school districts today already receive less than what the state considers to be adequate funding. And so in the federal budget proposals, it gets even worse. There's another $12 billion proposed by I think it's the House, and also the president's proposed budget cuts $12 billion. And it's likely that whatever gets done before the end of the month or in any continuing resolution that goes on will be bad news for public education.
Thank you, Anne. This warm-up is really a segue into our next question. And again, I'm going to offer this second one for everybody to weigh in. And then we've identified some questions based on topic for the rest of the evening. But this next one is around some areas that you've already raised, and the topic around equity, and then also access in a child's education. So I'm framing it in that way: access in a child's education and equity. Ensures that all students, regardless of background, have the support and resources needed to succeed, which often involves different levels of support for those different needs, right? And those are in our public schools. While this is an Illinois level conversation, we need to mention that even in a relatively wealthy community, and we're in DuPage County here, I am, and I think most of the rest of us, or many of the rest of us are, in the western suburbs. We in our county, in our local school districts, have schools with up to 47% of students receiving free meals, breakfast, lunch. We have a high school in our district with 42% of students receiving options for free meals. So how are federal actions impacting equity, access for students, for children that you serve? And so I will start, actually, Lauri, this time with you, if you want to go ahead and weigh in on that.
Sure. So many of you probably know that in July, the current administration released a new rule that has been in place almost 30 years that would move Head Start from an educational program to the federal public benefit welfare bucket. I call them buckets, but anyways, and by doing so, it makes children we serve that are undocumented immigration status checks that we have to require to do to serve only those that are here legally. And they didn't provide any guidance with this at all. And so we of course took action on that, but that as I said earlier, Head Start has served for 60 years children most in need and never asked about immigration status. And so that was released and limits, potentially could limit who we can serve across our community. And then in addition, I mentioned the diversity, equity, and inclusion ban. And so Head Start has had to remove all language from their continuing application grants. And the federal government is checking those or checking our websites. And we had to certify that we're not doing diversity, equity, and inclusion. We can't use any funding to support DEI services, such as dual language learners, translation of materials. So when we speak of equity and access, those are two big things that are happening in our world that impact services for children and families.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Lauri, thank you for giving that example, because I think sometimes we need to, as someone not on the panel but moderating it, just better understanding what are those details, right? What are some of those examples that help us to better understand what happens when those changes are made? Yeah, thank you. Jessica, I'm going to turn over to you for this question, and just a note, because I think you've kind of referred to this already, but just as a reminder and a little bit of background, in 2017, the Evidence-Based Funding for Student Success, or EBF Act, overhauled the state of Illinois' K-12 public school funding system, right? So the law commits to annual funding, yet some school districts still have under-resourced schools, as they're described. And with federal cuts, there is the potential, of course, for additional shortfalls. So I want to frame it as the superintendent of a high school district, knowing that at least within the state of Illinois, we have evidence-based funding. But go ahead and speak to that question again of equity and access and the needs.
Yeah, absolutely. So when thinking about this question, right away the term uncertainty came to mind, right? Because I think that is what we all felt as we went through June, July, August, and what was going to happen with federal funding. In federal funding, different than the EBF you referred to, which is the kind of the state redistribution of funds in order to help provide more funds to areas of the state, rural areas that have less property tax income, that they're able to fund their schools. They are kind of certain buckets are being distributed based on need and all of that around the state. And so that has been a way to help to equalize mandates that are coming from the state of Illinois in their educational programming, right? It is very openly known that EBF program doesn't actually fund the Illinois mandates, but it's making it closer, right? So it's an ongoing discussion, and definitely something that I know they're talking about in Springfield regularly. In thinking about the federal impact, though, to add on top of that is the uncertainty around the title money. I think that is truly the case of what was going to happen as we had a variety of notifications and funds were frozen in June and July as normal title grants would be being completed and filled out in a regular routine, and programming has been established, right, of how we serve our students based on Title I, Title II, Title III, and Title IV funds. To give just a brief overview of what each one means, when we think of our Title I funds, this is our funds around disadvantaged students in particular. It is what you might have called a lot of times your equity funding. And I think just to build on what Lauri was talking about there, we have kind of demonized certain vocabulary around meaning things that doesn't always mean, I think. So it's really about serving the students that you have and serving what they need, right? And the education and services that are needed for those students in order to help them succeed. Title II is a lot of professional learning, teacher growth, other opportunities to bring teachers together to improve their curriculum, improve their craft, improve their actual pedagogy. Title III funds are around ML learners, English learners, multilingual, language learners, and making sure our programming is supporting those students and thinking of it in an asset mindset, right? Instead of thinking of it as something's wrong with these students, they actually have they have the ability to speak in multiple languages. This is a positive, but we need them to also, most of the education is going to be in English. So how do we help them get to that point where they're fluent in order to be able to access education fully and meet their full potential? And then Title IV, a lot of times can be based in a lot of areas, but enrichment, safety, health, technology. So having those frozen to get to the point made a lot of uncertainty. They were released. I think the majority of school districts in Illinois did get their funds as they had, or within a very close range of what they had anticipated. But we know going into the October session and whether or not we are on any type of, whether or not they actually fund the budget and don't have a freeze, we may or may not still have access to those funds is what I'm learning, as much as today, right? That some of those things are in question of what will happen come October 1st if we don't have a budget. So that uncertainty is real and made a lot of questions around, how are you going to pull those resources and what's going to go first, right? And not being able to serve certain particular groups of students or whole programs.
Thank you, Jessica. And thanks also for defining, again, those title programs, because again, I think the detail allows for audience members and for community members to better understand what does it mean, Lauri, to your point, the bucket, and the bucket sometimes, needs to be filled. So thank you for that. Very helpful.
Yeah, there's one more, it might come up later in the conversation, but also the funding around IDEA. And so, it was great to hear today. And as a reminder that this is our 50th anniversary for IDEA, which is our education requirements for special education students. And so that funding is also another area, but so far has not been threatened. To my knowledge.
Has not.
So maybe in some areas, but not the same level, the title. So.
Thank you. Let's see, Shauna, thoughts on this in terms of equity and access?
Wow. Well, I really appreciate Lauri sharing just the difficulties for programs, right? And we get different guidance, and we do have to sign these certifications now to ensure we're not discriminating, but there's really no actually, I should say we're getting directives, but not any guidance. So you never know when you're misstepping is basically sort of the way it goes. And the Head Start being federal to local means that we are implanted in local communities where we have determined there is need based on community assessment. And often, sometimes it's around racial lines, it's always around poverty, but there are other factors that we look at in figuring out how we prioritize families that we're going to serve. And so we collect all kinds of demographic data on families, right? And so that challenge for us is now, how do you present that? That was the basis for which we applied for funding. And so it's just really tricky to sort of figure that out. I think the other piece that's really important is the Child Care Assistance Program here in Illinois is funded through the Child Care Development Fund, which is through CCDBG, which is the Child Care Office, right? The Office of Child Care on the federal level. It is a sister agency to the Office of Head Start. And so we get a lot of the bulk of our child care dollars are federal dollars coming into the state. And so we haven't gotten a lot of guidance around that. But as a state, we are a target. As you know, our governor is not favored particularly with this administration. And so we are in a position where we do actually collect data on whether or not a child is documented or undocumented on the CCAP side. And so when we know that, we use federal dollars to go ahead and fund that child's child care assistance. And so now we're not certain, right, about that. Like when the feds ask us for data, are they going to try to disqualify us from all federal funding at some point as a state? And so there are those kinds of things we're really leery of. We're really trying to be careful of. I think the other unintended consequence, quite frankly, is in this environment of immigration enforcement in ways that are indiscriminate, is it's meant we've had a lot of families go underground. We've had a lot of families to, turn away from services out of fear. And these are families that are documented. I mean, it's not, so I think the other thing that folks don't understand is folks do have, even folks that have come here get temporary documentation. There's over 25 different statuses that you can be here and be an immigrant, and everyone is fearful. Right. And so folks that were here on humanitarian efforts, I think, Haitians and Venezuelans, you may have heard that they were here under humanitarian parole. Those things have been taken away. So now, they've been given a certain number of days to leave the country. And so you've got all these families in limbo. And I think we don't have a system in place on the education side to really support them. And so I think, in many respects, we're really scrambling. And we also have, we do have a governor, and we've got a government who is really about protecting children and families, but it may not translate to every community. I think we've got that going on. That's a real concern. But most importantly, the families that most need services have gone underground. And I think it makes it much more difficult now for us to provide services. And we're in a position where we can't even claim that we're a safe space. And so I think that's what we're grappling with now, at least in the early childhood side, for sure. We are all committed to the fact that every child here deserves an education, right? But we can't guarantee necessarily that child or that parent's safety. We actually have a partner center. This is very discouraging, but it was a dad of one of the children in one of our programs that passed last week due to some ICE action. Very frightening, Franklin Park. And, it's a lot, right? We have folks that are living in fear for valid reasons, and it makes it really challenging. And so I think as a state, we've got to look at how can we be creative, almost like in COVID, and be able to provide virtual services potentially. Like we've got to figure out the access piece for these families. And I don't think we are moving fast enough to make a difference. And so equity was all before the executive order on DEI came out, right? I think folks started already getting really nervous, those folks that are immigrants. And I think we've already started to lose families, and kids have already lost access just due to fear. And we've got to figure out how to respond to that and respond to that well. And I just don't think we're there yet. And then I think we have to figure out what we can do with our state dollars to mitigate some of the trauma that is happening in these communities. So
thank you for that.
Yeah.
And thanks for, again, just the definition of this. One of the objectives tonight certainly is to better understand some of the detail. And I'm thinking of the word complexity of what's happening behind the scenes to, again, provide education, period. Right. So thank you for that. Sarah, let me go to you real quick.
Sure. So thank you for jumping into the title funding information, Jessica. That's really helpful. And Shauna for really diving more into the CCAP program. I think a lot of people are unaware of that program, and it is extremely important to so many of the families that many of us serve in after school programs. But one of the things that I want to address with the title funding is I came from a school district that our after school service or out of school time programming served, and it was a 100% free and reduced lunch program. So I think about those families and that community that really relied on the schools and the government for the supports for their children to be nourished and ready to go each day. But federal actions that are reducing investment in public education and in early childhood programs and school-based mental health supports are directly affecting equity and access for the students that we serve. At GECRC, many of our students are from immigrant populations and under-resourced families who are relying on these supports to thrive academically and socially. The cuts to funding and the oversight widen the existing disparities, and it's making it harder for schools to provide the individualized attention and the enrichment that students need. Community-based programs like ours, we're working to fill these gaps, but without the sustained federal commitment, the burden falls disproportionately on families and local organizations, and it's threatening the progress towards educational equity.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Sarah, I'm thinking about a program that the Glen Ellyn Children's Resource Center, I believe with District 41, has done for high impact tutoring, and the difference that that can make to be very intentional, right, about focusing on student and student success. So those.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely.
thank you. Anne.
Yeah, I just want to briefly widen the focus a little bit to include the lack of support for families living in poverty. The federal government cut back on the child tax credit following the pandemic. They have increased child poverty. SNAP cuts are going to increase food insecurity, and school meal programs have been cut, and hungry kids can't learn as well. Poorer health for parents who are going to lose their Medicaid coverage will affect the family and will affect student learning. And schools will lose some of their Medicaid dollars that they use for school nurses and for other special ed supports. The big picture for cuts is going to increase disparities and widen gaps from top to bottom. And that's something that we need to keep an eye on.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to transition into a question, and Jessica, this is for you, and then I'll have another question for some of our other panelists. But it makes me think about something that I know I've heard educators say, Board of Education members say, administrators say, and that is in public education, the children who show up at the front door of that school, we educate. And so as we think about this, and to your point, kind of broadening that lens, that statement comes to mind for me. And so that, the, again, complexity of it as you think about it. Jessica, this question is for you. And this is something that is not new and will always be, I think, a part of our conversation. And that's the idea of a trust in education, trust in public education. In recent years, there's been certainly heightened discussion around the concept of the parental choice, this sense of a perceived sense of government overreach in education. How is this discussion in our communities affecting public trust in schools, in educators and administrators, et cetera? What's your thought?
Yeah, it's a big question, right? It's a big topic, but I think from my position in our local area, I want to say that I am very thankful every single day of the type of support we have in Glenbard District 87 and in our 6 feeder community districts that come to us throughout the greater Glenbard community. That I think is very real. And I also feel that we're very well funded and supported locally, right? People pay their taxes, they believe in education, they move to our towns because of our schools. So very thankful for that. But I do think that from the larger perspective and the bigger conversation around it, and then turning on the news and the national conversation and in the greater community, there's this increased polarization around whether or not schools are doing their job, right? Whether or not they can be trusted, whether or not they're meeting accountability measures. Something that comes to mind is just in my career of 24, 25 years in education, the accountability measures have changed and changed and changed again. And so that is confusing. It's confusing to people who do it for a living, let alone for those that are trying to measure and analyze our schools as good as they can be. I embrace accountability measures. I went into this field in the sense that I believe what we're doing is the most important job out there. No offense to anyone else out there, right? But we got to believe that when we're in it, because what we're doing is essentially I think, an incredible opportunity to help kids figure out who they want to be, who they are, and reach their potential, right? And to dream and to be able to figure out how they want to make a difference, how they're going to contribute. And so when you are constantly bringing under question or scrutiny in a way that's not easy to understand or easy to measure whether we're meeting those standards, it's just a constant it's a constant job to try to translate that instead of having consistency to be able to follow through and hold us accountable to make sure we are doing our job and doing the best we can and getting better, right, as we go. So those are some of the things that I think of. I think of a lot of times as I talk to new teachers, as they've come into the field and leave the field often, I think the changing in the way teachers are viewed, or like the level of respect that the profession gets, compared to other countries around the world. I had the wonderful opportunity of traveling as part of a Fulbright program to Japan to study schools in Japan. And, and it was very interesting to think about how the teachers were viewed in their society and in their communities compared to how they are in the United States. And I was with 200 American teachers. This was back in 2007. But it was an incredible experience to take a lens of thinking about what if we gave that kind of ultimate respect to the profession in a way that shows that we value what we're doing. We value that you're doing everything you can to help students grow. And we better answer that. Like, we better do our job and hold us accountable to do that. This isn't just, get that respect for nothing. We work hard and make sure we're doing what we need to be doing. But that piece, unfortunately, I think is reducing instead of increasing. And so we're seeing less people. I know it's a future topic, but when we think about teacher shortages and the changing to the pension systems and all those pieces, how do we keep highly motivated and, committed educators coming into the field so that we truly can do the hard work, right, and make a difference? So those are some of the pieces that have come to mind in that area. But
thank you for that. We're going to transition into a question specifically for our early childhood professionals on the panel. But all of this, Jessica, to your point, is really wrapped around this sense of trust in the system, trust in the process, trust in the partnerships and the collaboration. And again, that there's such great support in the community for what we're doing and for what education provides. This next question on early childhood funding is, again, specific. Lauri, I'm going to start with you on this. And it's around how have federal funding proposals or cuts affected early childhood programs like Headstart. We've talked a little bit about this already. Let's do a little bit of, I have three of you on this one. Shauna, you'll go next, and then Sarah from the perspective of outside of school programming. But it's about a minute and a half, 2 minutes on this. And what consequences do you see for the youngest learners? Again, scaffolding learning starts at the early childhood piece of it all the way through, our high school and post-high school system. So Lauri, your thoughts?
Yeah, so I'm a little tainted. I just came from DC. I've been there all week. And the primary thought is that we'll be flat funded. So both childcare and Head Start will be flat funded. This means we've gone 3, maybe 4 years with minimal increase or no increase at all. And they said that flat funding is a win. And I'm thinking, no, it's not, because it's really a cut. You think about, inflation and the increases in costs and services, and a compensation for our workforce. And what this means is that we don't have any other strategies for funding. And so what programs have typically done is they are able to reduce their enrollment and keep the same level of funding, and then use those funds to provide compensation for their workforce. And so we've seen this happen over the last 4, 5, 6 years. And now we're serving 50% less Head Start children than we were 6 years ago. So to get to a compensation, to be competitive in compensation, we've had to reduce enrollment. So we know that 20,000 children aren't getting Head Start because of Congress not holding funding as a priority for early childhood and, you know, Head Start and childcare. I just have to say one more thing about DOGE and the defend the spend. So even though funding has been appropriated, our programs don't get that whole grant dollars just loaded down to them. They have to draw down as they spend the funds. And so when you go to the federal payment management system to draw down your funds, sometimes they don't come for weeks. And so programs can't hold on for they don't have reserves built up to hold on all that time. So even though money's been appropriated, we're still having difficulty pulling down those funds to pay our workforce and pay our bills.
Thank you for that insight. Very helpful. Again, this bit of reality check on what's going on behind the scenes, right? Yeah, Lauri, thank you. Shauna, about a minute and a half. What do you think?
You know, I think the other thing that's really important to note is that early childhood is so underfunded that many providers blend and braid dollars. So they might be a Head Start provider, but they will couple that money with Preschool for All funding that comes through the Early Childhood Block Grant, which is with the Illinois State Board of Education, or they might couple it with CCAP, what I talked about earlier, to make a full day of childcare for working families. And so anything that happens to Head Start has a tremendous impact on our entire ecosystem of early childhood services. So as threats were looming there, you know, it would be nice to say, well, that's okay. We have, you know, robust state investments, which we have about $3 billion is about what we spend, and we need about 12 billion. You know, but it's not enough to make up the shortfall. And so that unsteadiness really sort of rocked our world in early childhood when we heard about Project 2025 and the decision that they had made to eliminate Head Start. We're really grateful for those that have fought for it. But I think what's important is that we don't have stability in the field because of the lack of commitment and the lack of understanding of the importance of these services still. So most of our state dollars are going to children that we deem are in marginalized communities or under-resources or low income. You know, but we talk about, you know, could we ever get to universal childcare? And again, it's a mindset shift, right? We would have to figure out how do we have wholehearted investments, both on the federal and state level to make that happen. But every shift in the stability related to federal dollars coming into our state means there's risk to what it is that we can provide for families. And as Lauri shared, the 50% of the lowered enrollment of children hasn't necessarily been picked up by preschool, even though we've been expanding preschool throughout our state for the past couple of years. There's still many kids that are still not getting services and families that need the extra comprehensive services of Head Start. So it is impacting us. I think over the next 3 years, as we look at the data, we'll really begin to see that as kids show up to kindergarten, you know, with maybe no formal education experience prior to that. So that is the impact.
Thank you, Shauna. Sarah, from that perspective of out of school time experience.
Sure. I'm gonna we kind of dovetail off of what Shauna was just speaking about. But over the past decade, a dedicated group of leaders from across our county, they've mobilized to form early childhood collaborations. And while each collaboration is a little unique and it's shaped by the needs of the specific community they represent, each collab's focus has been to support early childhood screenings, meeting basic needs, and advocating for publicly funded slots that close the gap in existing preschool deserts around our region. And it's hard to believe, but yes, in DuPage, we do have preschool deserts. The work of community early childhood collaboration pulls together a dynamic cross-section of community leaders, elected officials, school administrators, quality child care centers and home providers, nonprofit organizations, hospitals and FQHCs, pediatricians, postpartum nurses, midwifery practitioners, early intervention specialists, business owners, mental health clinicians, and parents, who are all working together for collective impact that benefits children before reaching kindergarten. This full circle of care in a young child's life has made significant gains in building not only community trust and understanding in the importance of early childhood screening services and programs, but more importantly, the work collaborative has made marked improvements in kindergarten readiness scores and skills. While this critical work has been instrumental in improving overall quality of life, much of the work in motion that addresses the preschool deserts I mentioned earlier, in DuPage County alone, our overall population is about 1 million residents, and just over 64,000 of our county's neighbors are children ages 0 to 5 years old. However, there's only 30,161 slots of available publicly funded licensed and license exempt child care centers and homes for children birth to 5. If we take that number and break it down even further and only look at publicly funded programs like Headstart, Early Headstart, Preschool for All, and Preschool for All expansion, there's only 6,761 slots that exist in DuPage County, leaving a currently existing gap of nearly 8,200 slots for children who are living at 200%, living at or below 200% of the federal poverty level. Further funding reductions to early childhood education will not only significantly affect the work that's already been done to close the existing preschool deserts that are existing in our county, but also poses regional ripple effects on available workforce and economic impact across our region. Simultaneously, this influences the overall well-being of our children who cannot participate in early childhood programs such as Head Start, where they would receive academic and wraparound supports, which ultimately prepare them for kindergarten, grade school, and beyond.
Yeah, it's one of the things you said that struck me, and I'm taking some notes, but this kind of breakdown of what we have holistically, what that really means when you start to see that service breakage. But then also, what you said, Sarah, just as an aside, the power of collaboration. I know that at least last year, I remember seeing for the Glenbard Early Childhood Collaborative, GECC, free developmental screenings, which is huge. And we want our children, our youngest, birth to 3, birth to 5, right, to get those screenings. And so the fact that those are available without cost is a support for our school systems of ultimately helping kids be ready to come into our public school systems, right? All connected. Yeah.
Yes.
Talking about that, really important.
Absolutely. Thank you, Erica.
Yeah. Let's go to another subject that is has a lot of conversation, not just within the state of Illinois, but certainly at the federal level. Jessica, I'm going to start with you, and then Ann, you'll be the other voice on this. But it's around school vouchers. So school vouchers. The current federal administration and many states have promoted the kind of the shifting of federal funds toward private and religiously affiliated schools through what are described as voucher programs. Right now, Illinois has yet to decide whether to participate in the new federal voucher program in HR 1, which was the bill that was passed, right? How do you think school vouchers would affect the stability and quality of local public schools in Illinois? What are your thoughts, just generally, Jess?
Yeah, generally. So this is where the social studies teacher in me comes out, and I start to think about, Thomas Jefferson and Horace Mann and John Dewey, and really thinking about, again, the fundamental purpose of education was really a belief in like the shared ownership of the collective good and the power of educating all for the better of all, right? And that commitment would be shared. And obviously over time that has been adjusted into real policy and implementation into our public school systems. When I think it's a very scary thing. I am so grateful to be in a state that has still resisted vouchers. I think that while they, at first glance, right, and in first conversation, I'm from the state of Ohio. Okay, so that's where I grew up. So I have many contacts. I've taught in Ohio. I taught in the Cleveland area, and I taught in the Cincinnati area before being in Chicago. And so having those contacts and having those, I'm learning a lot about how their system is impacting. I have cousins that are educators in Ohio. It's really, I'll go back to that word of uncertainty and just that unpredictability and instability it creates around funding and budgets and planning and long-term strategic vision around what a district can do and provide when they can't predict from year to year in any any logical way what their funding will look like, really perpetuates the problem. I think it's coming from a place of feeling like, you know, students should have choice to go to a successful school, or should have rights to goods. Every student might have deserve rights to the best school in those pieces. But what it's doing is perpetuating and actually deepening the disparity and the divide that exists between schools. Instead of looking at ways where you can equalize those experiences, it's deepening them. So it's very scary. And I think it's one of those things that it's just going to step us away from that fact that we have a shared ownership and responsibility, and we can learn from one another and make each other better. And it will divide those resources and really make many, many schools unstable, even those that have long-term stability in their planning and in their strategic growth.
Yeah, thank you for that insight about, again, that kind of prediction, building your budget, hiring, all those pieces that go into it. I think that's something that maybe we don't, that doesn't come top of the mind when you hear this.
Yeah, I mean, another real concrete example, I was just in a discussion for Columbus, in the Columbus area schools today. And, you know, sometimes these policies are implemented in a variety of ways, right? But sometimes in this particular case, what was being shared with me was around transportation costs, and that in some situations, the public school district is still responsible for transportation while all the funds are leaving the district to the private entity. So you have you're carrying the burden of many of the expenses still, but yet you're not educating the students. And so again, that just disparity of funding is very confusing and very difficult. And the average person doesn't understand that that's a piece that's contributing. They're thinking that it's their child, and they want that choice. And I know parents are trying to do the best for their children, and they want the best education possible, and I'll never blame anybody for that. But I think we need to look at being partners in it, and how do we come together for the best solution.
Thank you, Jessica.
Mhm.
And your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so just quickly, there's a few things that we know about voucher programs from them being in effect in states like Ohio for a long time. One is that many students have shown that students who are attending schools with using vouchers have worse educational outcomes, and that sudden expansion of the vouchers in some states has led to low quality pop-up schools with no oversight. Vouchers also put students' civil rights at risk because private and religious schools are allowed to discriminate in hiring and in admissions against LGBTQ students and teachers and parents. Unpopular religious beliefs, pregnant teens, single moms, all can face discrimination that they would not have in public schools. Private religious schools may not provide sufficient resources for students with disabilities or support for students to gain English proficiency. There's 200,000 students who need that support in Illinois, located throughout the state. And a quarter of Illinois residents speak language other than English at home. But many of those private schools do not provide that kind of language support. Vouchers also lack accountability and quality standards, and they subsidize the wealthy parents, many of whom are already in private schools, at the expense of public school students and taxpayers. Just a little bit about the actual bill that was passed in HR 1. It provides for a $1,700 dollar for dollar tax credit. So if you donate $1,700 to a scholarship granting organization, you will get all of that money back on your tax credits. You basically aren't out of pocket a cent. But the federal budget, the federal coffers are out that money. And there's no cap currently on that amount that the federal government could be obligated to provide. And estimates range from $8 billion to $51 billion, which would pay for Head Start many times over. So it's a substantial cost to the federal government. And that money should be spent on public education first, certainly, and other key services like childcare that we need. And then local schools as Jessica pointed out, are gonna also feel the pinch, either having to pay for transportation, also seeing a couple students here and there gone. You still have fixed costs. You still have to hire the counselors and the nurse and the facilities. So you've got less money and fixed costs, and you end up out of pocket. So all in all, it's a bad deal. There is some discussion about possibly being able to use the vouchers for public schools. For example, having your public school foundation apply to be a scholarship granting organization. And then they could use those vouchers for, say, tutoring programs in public schools. So currently the rules have not been issued by the Department of the Treasury. So we don't really know what that would look like. We can hope that they would be very supportive of public education, although, if you have to make a guess right now in the current climate, maybe not so much. And we can hope that the state would develop regulations that would support public schools. But I think on balance, it's unlikely that you'd come out ahead, even if there were a very generous provision for vouchers for public schools because of all of these other detriments. So that's where we are.
Thank you, Anne, for the insight. Before we move on to the next question, I see that someone has their hand up. We do not have access to unmute attendees. This is a webinar and it's set up for that. However, I would love for you, if you would go over to the webinar chat or the chat box, please feel free to put your question in there. And if you'd like someone to get back with you from our panel, we will definitely share it with them and they'll reach out to them if you're willing to share your email address. So thank you for that. The next question is something that has been raised already. Anne, just to give you a heads up, I'm going to go to you with kind of the first part of this question, and then Sarah and Jessica have you weigh in briefly on this as well. The topic is immigration and the Illinois Safe Schools legislation. Many of our students come from immigrant families. We've heard that conversation already tonight. And so the legal uncertainties create, as a couple of you have talked about, certainly fear, uncertainty, making decisions perhaps not to send their child to school, and is certainly a distraction from learning. And it's an impact also, as some folks have shared, not only directly affecting the families, but also for the school community, for the children in that classroom, et cetera. So Anne, can you explain the Illinois Safe Schools Act, Safe Schools for All Act? It's Illinois HB 3247, signed into law on August 16th, 2025.
Yeah, about 43 years ago, there was a Supreme Court case called Plyler v. Doe, and it established that all children in the United States are entitled to equal access to a basic public elementary and secondary education, regardless of their actual or perceived immigration status or citizenship status, or the perceived or actual status of their parents or guardians. 3 states in this last year have introduced legislation to deny enrollment to undocumented students: Tennessee, Oklahoma, and Indiana, despite this standing Supreme Court decision. So in Illinois, we have been proactive. We have passed a law that enacts the Plyler v. Doe protections. It makes clear that in Illinois, every child has a right to equal access to a free public education, and the school is safe from intimidation and fear. There's 148,000 U.S. citizen children in Illinois who live with an undocumented parent. So it's very important to include protections for the entire family. Schools cannot exclude a child from participation in any program or activity based on the perceived or suspected status of the child's parents or guardians. So it's a great way to protect Illinois kids. The schools have to develop policies and procedures by July 1st of 2026 to enact this law. And they also have included a private right of action in that bill so that parents who feel that their rights have been violated have a right to sue the school district.
And thank you for that good insight and also umbrella. I want to go to Sarah first. And really, Sarah and Jessica, what I'm looking for you to do is give us some insight on what can be done, what's being done in terms of under the law to protect students who come from immigrant families. What's happening within your areas?
Since joining the Glen Ellyn Children's Resource Center a little over a month ago, I've been on a listening tour in our community. Even as a long-term resident myself, I've learned about several ways that our neighbors are coming together and responding to better protect students who are part of newcomer families. This is including sharing timely information about free public trainings from the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights, and offering ongoing youth mental health first aid by groups like Kids Matter and NAMI DuPage for Neighbors. But really at the heart of it, I think protection starts with connection. We have far more in common with one another than sometimes we often realize. And being curious and asking questions and taking the time to understand one another builds trust. I'm seeing this every day at GECRC. We have adults and young adults who take the time to connect with students while helping them with homework. Yesterday and today, I watched 3 high school students who were volunteering their time with one of our middle school programs. And the first question they asked wasn't about homework. It wasn't about what they needed to get done with their homework. And it wasn't about what they needed help with their homework. It was, they extended a warm hello and they shared a name exchange and they asked how their day was going. They broke bread together and shared snacks. And once they knew that the kids were in ready mode, they could then get started, the collectively get going on their academic and their tutoring components of the day. So neighbor to neighbor models work best when we first take the time to truly know each other. Often during challenging times, I think people are left feeling powerless and hopeless and alone. But the realities are there are not only incredible resources in our community, but truly gifted neighbors with all sorts of expertise and wisdom and lived experience that can build stronger protections for our younger neighbors and families who are facing incredible threats and fears about simply walking down the street and going to school. When we first seek to understand one another, I think we can better serve each other and be prepared for the unexpected as well as protect one another.
Thank you. Jessica, from a high school perspective.
Yeah. Sarah, I just am so grateful for your organization, just to add in there, just as previously the principal of Glenbard South, and then obviously now as superintendent of Glenbard, having so many kids from both of the Glen Ellyn high schools volunteer and participate, and they're so proud of their work and their connection. So it's an unbelievable organization. I think just to add on to what Sarah's saying, I think, you know, one of the things we're spending a lot of time talking about is just making sure we do have procedures in place, that we do understand, and that those are things, you know, that we have partnerships to understand what the role of the police are, right? We have SROs in each of our buildings. And so school resource officers, we have lots of acronyms in education, so sorry about that, but school resource officers. So helping to understand, you know, their role, they cannot step in the middle between ICE and, you know, the school officials and coming in, but there is a great partnership, and they keep saying that there's a great partnership, that when ICE is going to enter a community, they do let the police know, and the police can let the school know what's going on or what's happening. So those are things that we're trying to understand, how the different agencies and systems work together, and what information can be shared. We're trying to make sure that families that have questions have resources, and that we can share those resources with them. So this is not unique to immigration status or our current situation, but our student services departments have spent years, right, compiling and especially, I mean, think about through COVID and beyond, it really escalated beyond where the school becomes the center of much of support for families and for students. They often go to the school first, and then we're connecting them to other community-based services and organizations. And so compiling that, they've done an incredible, that our student services departments across the 4 buildings have done an incredible job compiling. And I'm actually looking at it now, where there's tabs for services on counseling, mental health, employment, food, housing, internet technology services, legal support, medical, refugee services, rights, and so forth. So you know, this information has links, it describes it tells them like what you need in order to utilize this organization. We also have figured out what language supports are available with each of these organizations, so they can see, you know, if they would be able, or if they need a translator, what would happen to go to these organizations. So being able to make sure that's readily available and people know who else they can go to. One of the things that is important, and I think we have had some real conversations around, is understanding also like what is in our control and what isn't in our control. And so making sure that we are honest and not over promising things that we can't over promise. You know, for example, if students are going away on a trip, a band trip, so to speak, out of state into another place, to another area, and, you know, we're getting calls around, can we guarantee if something this and this, you know, we cannot, right? So that's like, I think there has to be honesty, but also making sure that we're doing everything we can to follow procedures and make sure procedures and laws are followed.
Yeah. Thank you, Jessica.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we have one more question, and then we will go to our final wrap-up question so that everybody can have 15 or 20 seconds to weigh in on that. But the question that I want to speak about, which we talked about earlier, that is always part of this and on people's mind, is this idea of a shortage of teachers, shortage of educators. So Jessica, I'm gonna have you unmute and go first this time. And then Shauna, have you weigh in, and Lauri, give a little bit of insight on this one. So 87%, the statistic that we have from the Illinois Association of Regional Superintendents of Schools, 87% of Illinois school leaders report a significant shortage problem with needs for educators expected to grow in the future. Jessica, you leaned in a little bit on this earlier in some of your comment. Can you give us, just looking at our time here, a little over a minute maybe, and I know this is a big question, but just some thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think, just to kind of get to the point and summarize, I think the shortages are felt in unequal ways around our state, right? And so you have, and are impacting particular areas more than others. And so, again, very thankful and appreciative for our community and our area, that we are a very well respected school district and community, and people really want to work in Glenbard and in our feeder communities. And so while we are definitely feeling the teacher shortage, but more through more limited pools of applicants than we had seen in the past, it has not impacted us the way it has many of my colleagues that I meet and work with around the state or around the country, where they're literally going through the year with vacancies that are left open, and they're filling with substitutes, or that, you know, they're filling with aides that don't have the right certifications, looking for emergency certifications, and substitutes that don't have what is truly in need for those areas. Specialty subjects and specialty areas and things with like higher level education, those honors, AP, dual credit classes that require extra certification, but really provide equitable services for students that they could earn college credit before they leave high school, requires a very high skilled, high trained, high certified staff. And so the less staff that you have, the less likely you're going to be able to provide those programmings. So, you know, some districts are at a significant disadvantage to not being able to offer that higher level quality of education because of the shortages in that area, and they can't get to it. So they're trying to do things like virtual education programs, or partnering across districts and sharing teachers who are teaching on Zoom across many rural areas and communities. But we know that's a different experience than if someone can be in the room and actually working with the students. So those are some of the pieces, just to get the conversation started, that are very real.
Thank you. Thanks, Jessica. And again, I'm grateful that we're also kind of expanding and reminding this is not just in our area, but also that this is different depending on the part of the state you're in, et cetera, right? Lauri, I'm going to go to you, and then Shauna, again, just about a minute on this, and then we'll close up with what can we be doing moving forward? Lauri. Okay.
Yeah, so I think Shauna alluded to this in the beginning around the perception that our teachers are just babysitters. And when we really know that teachers in early childhood are critical to brain development and getting children's ready for school and ready for life. So I think that we need to change the perception that many have around early childhood. And we know that, for example, in infant toddler classrooms, teachers want to get ready, moved to the preschool classroom. But we know even the earlier the infant toddler teachers are even more extremely critical to development than our preschool teachers. So the whole system, and then the perceived notion that education is not as important in early childhood is important. And then I think, just in closing, I would say mental health is critical. Those mental health resources are critical to our classrooms and support our teachers, our workforce, and our children and families that we're serving.
Great. Thanks, Lauri. And Shauna, a minute on this.
Yep, I appreciate what Lauri is sharing. I think for us, we're really hemorrhaging as a field in terms of competition industries, right? We are paying minimum wage in many instances throughout the state for folks that we expect to spend up to 8 to 10 hours a day with our earliest learners. And so that there's that devaluing of the work, right? We often look at the work as only care and not the education piece, and understanding the importance of the attachment caregiving, and the context of a relationship is how children learn. And when they're very young, they need that. And so we need to do more, I think, for educators in that respect. But what Lauri shared about early childhood mental health, we do have consultants available to go in to centers to support teachers around behaviors. And we know, the kids we're seeing now are COVID babies, right? They were not socialized. They were born during a period of huge trauma. And so, what that means is high stress for teachers. And so it is easier to go and get a job at Aldi's or another grocery store where you're going to get 18, maybe up to $20, which is more than what you're currently getting, and benefits. So we do a poor job around compensation. We do an extremely poor job around benefits on the child care side, and so teachers often will look up and say, you know what, I'm going over to a school district, I can at least get some benefits. And so we have classrooms that are closed due to lack of professionals to be able to need. And so it's really impacted us as a field.
Yeah. Shauna, thank you. We have time for one last question, and it's really for everyone, but it's a wrap up where we can ask moving forward. For those that are here with us, and as we're thinking about this together, what can we do in terms of a better understanding, supporting, and thinking about protecting both early childhood and public education in our communities? This is the field that you live in and work in, and you've chosen to be in as professionals. And so what can we think about moving forward? And I'm going to start, Sarah, with you on this one.
Sure. So I think priority policies should be focused on access to high quality education for all students from early child through high school. This includes, like I spoke about earlier, sustained and increased funding for public school programs like Headstart and home visiting, as well as community partnerships that provide enrichment for mental health support. They provide enrichment and mental health support and community and family engagement. Just a little bit ago, Shauna was talking about the inequity that exists within the pay structure. And with any company or organization, our people are our biggest assets, and they need to be recognizing a strong professional workforce as an essential to meeting all the goals that we're going to set out to achieve. Earlier this week, I was looking at the recent publication by 0 to 3, and it highlighted the median age for our early childhood workforce is $13.07 per hour. And that's far below what the minimum wage, like a living wage in DuPage County for a single adult, is $27.66 per hour. So a strong and properly compensated talent pool who are entrusted to care and teach our children allows for our community to remain strong and vibrant now and into the future. I'd also say that additional policies should be strengthening our social, emotional, and civic learning while addressing barriers that face under-resourced families. Protecting these foundational resources helps every school, every student, and every school thrive academically, socially, and as an informed and engaged neighbor. And if you're not tapped into an early childhood collaboration, reach out and get involved. They are all around our communities.
Thank you, Sarah. Ann, what do you think?
Yeah, as a former school board member and president, I urge you all to monitor your local school board. Support your teachers, support your administrators, and join in these collective impact efforts in local community collaborations. I helped start one in Oak Park, and they are powerful, and we funding and shared resources between school districts, the village, and all of the community partners that Sarah mentioned can be a very great way to ameliorate some of these federal funding cuts.
Thank you, Ann. Lauri, what do you think?
Just a couple of thoughts. So I always say seeing is believing. So getting out and visiting your local Head Start program so you can get a real good feel of the great work that's going on with children and with the families. That two-generational approach is so critical. And then the last thing, someone told me a couple weeks ago that hope is not a strategy. So get out there and do things. Call your legislators, whether it's your local, state, or federal legislators, to take action. I don't think we can sit on the sidelines for moving forward. And so we need to speak out about what we want and value, and for the funding of our educational programs.
Thank you, Lauri. Shauna.
You know, I will say our education system, prenatally all the way through higher ed, is underfunded in our state. And we have and who really believes in the value of education, and yet due to lack of federal resources, we can't fund it at the level we would like to fund it. And so we know that this is an issue all throughout the system, and it's so important to get involved, as some of my peers have said here, but I think even to have conversations with your peers and with your neighbors, and to talk about how every cut is interrelated. You know, all of these things are interrelated. All of these things coexist sort of within this realm of funding for our state, and a cut to Medicaid or a cut to SNAP impacts families and children in a way that eventually will impact their ability to learn. And so I think is power, knowledge is power. Education can move families out of poverty, change the trajectory of children's lives. And it's important to be having those conversations with your neighbors and figuring out how to get involved in your local communities as an advocate.
Thank you, Shauna. And Jessica, our last voice on this.
All right, thank you. I really was thinking some of the same things that Ann mentioned, you know, being involved, participating, learning, listening, being a part of the conversation. I just want I truly, you know, want to partner with our communities and with our families and take and hear the feedback, but experience it, but also have everybody. If I could just encourage people to make sure that they are hearing and listening on both sides, and we need to do the same thing. So how do we ensure that we can come together and have conversations, and sometimes, you know, make a point to see the other side and the other perspective as we're working through complexity and situations. So I think we have to be willing to do that and to actually see the work. Many times I hear conversations around, if there's a lot of surveys, a lot of conversations around, if you ask people how they feel about their school or their child's education, they feel the numbers are very positive. But then as you get further out and you ask them questions about their communities or their state or the national level of education, it gets more and more negative. And so I think that concept is, you know, how do we tell more of those narratives, or those true experiences that are happening at that personal level that we're proud of, and that really are the fabric of our system, and let that be the story, versus how things sometimes get spun and changed over time into a different narrative, because they're hearing that that's what's happening for others. So those, I mean, it's a little aloof there, but I think, how do we really have the conversations and do the work together?
Yeah, thank you for that. And it ties, that last point ties back into, Sarah, what you were talking about with the collaborations that come together in order to lift and better educate community members about what's happening. One of the things that I have heard again over time, just in my work, when as I served on a local school board like you did, Anne, as well, and that is the more we understand kind of at our own level, and can embrace that, the stronger our ability to understand what we might not agree with, right? That we have to push into that, lean into it to better understand wholly what's out there and what the needs and interests are. So that's part of the goal of what we do when we educate, is to look at that. So I want to thank you all. I'm going to turn it over to my partner Karin to close us out.
That was tremendous. Thank you so much for your time and effort to our panelists for joining us this evening. The insight was amazing. We could, I think, talk for another couple of hours probably. I'm grateful for everyone also who made time to attend this program. A recording will be posted on the League of Women Voters Illinois site, the League of Women Voters Glen Ellyn site, as well as our YouTube channel. And I want to just give a little commercial for our next community meeting, which is October 16th in Glen Ellyn. It'll be covering the topic of ranked choice voting. And to make that topic a little bit more palatable, we're going to be tasting cheese and voting on different types of cheese. So that's not to be missed. You can find out more at LWVGE.org. So thank you, everybody, and have a good night.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank
Bye.
you.